Welcome to the Upper Room. Once again, so glad you joined us. It's fun to spend this time getting into God's Word together, specifically the Upper Room. We are coming to you from the University of Arizona campus once again in Tucson. And today we're at the Flandreau Science Center and Planetarium. Now they have, as you can tell, an observatory behind me. They have a larger observatory up on Mount Lemmon. And if you're in the mood for a giant observatory, a giant telescope, it's up on Kitt Peak, just south of here. I don't know about you, but I love science. It's not that I was good at science, but I love the idea of science. It's just the facts, right? I mean, that's what we learned from Sergeant Friday and Dragnet so many years ago. Just the facts, ma'am. Supposedly, science is just the facts. And so we have been taught one of the great lies of our society as Christ followers that we should fear science. There couldn't be anything further from the truth. We embrace science because science doesn't deny there's a God. Science actually, if you go with the facts of science, actually reveals there's a God. And the God that it reveals is incredible. The astronomers that work at places like this have shown us over the last many decades that we have 100 billion galaxies in our universe. And within those 100 billion galaxies, each galaxy has 100 billion stars like our sun. Incredible. So the word that comes to mind when I think of God is incredible. First discussion question right off the bat. Using just one word, this is an easy one, you'll knock this out of the park. Describe God with one word. I'll actually give you several shots at it, but describe him with one word. I'm interested in what that one word would be. And so we're told that science is not about beliefs, it's not about persuasions or ideas, it's simply about facts, correct? And so as followers of Jesus, we have nothing to be afraid of, nothing to hide. Let's go with just the facts. Let me give you a couple examples of how science doesn't work out for the pagan world. You've heard the phrase, follow the science. You've heard it so much in the last year and a half. Let's follow the science. When it comes to abortion, follow the science. No, nothing about beliefs, nothing about emotions or faith. Follow the science. Science takes us inside the womb of a mother where we see a human being moving, sucking his or her thumb, trying to escape saline solution that comes in to put their life to an end. That's what this science shows us. They won't show you that science on mainstream media or television, will they? How about genders? God's word says there's just 2 genders. However, the world we live in now says there's up to 70. So when it comes to discussions about science relating to genders, there's no way around it. They have found 2 genders. As much as they want to believe, have faith that there are more, there are just 2 genders. How about design in the universe and design in the human body, design in nature? It's everywhere, which tells us if there's design, which science shows us, then necessarily there is a designer, right? If you have a piano, you have a piano maker. If you have a watch, you have a watchmaker. If there's design in nature, in the universe, there's a designer. Finally, don't even get me started on the experimental drug they want us to put in our bodies. They're demanding we put in our bodies, saying follow the science. Follow the science is about the facts. I say all that because we're going back into the upper room. We're only going to cover a couple, 2 or 3 verses, but I want us to focus on the facts, not emotions anymore, not beliefs, the facts that Jesus lays out. One of the words I would use for God is incredible, which we see from science. We're also going to see something incredible in what Jesus says in the upper room. So glad you joined us. Well, we've relocated and we're in front of Stone Canyon Resort. This is an exclusive community, golfing community, beautiful golf course. I think I got to golf on it one time. And it's the exclusivity of it that we're interested in. What Jesus is going to say now in the upper room puts his followers, yourself, myself included, in a very exclusive group of people for a certain reason that I find absolutely incredible. And that's what we're going to venture into. You might remember last lesson or 2, we were in the vineyard and then in front of an old house that's going to be burned down. And it was all about being connected to Jesus. And that theme continues of being connected to Jesus. And trust me, just that alone makes us in an exclusive group of people. People who are connected intimately to Jesus. It's open to anybody, but there are very few, Jesus said in his own words, who will connect with me in a relational way. So let's get into the text. We're in John chapter 15, starting in verse 9. And as I mentioned when we were down at the U of A, there are just some very factual things, kind of like science, some very factual things that we're going to cover to get into the part that I think is, well, it's all incredible, but the most incredible thing that occurred to me as I read through it this time. So here we go, verse 9, and Jesus says this, "As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love." Okay, so let's start with the basics. This is the who. This is the who. The Father, he says, has remained in me. I remain in him. You remain in me. And what he has outlined very succinctly is kind of a triangle relationship, the Father, the Son, and ourselves. And I don't need to go much deeper than that other than to tell you that this thing we call discipleship, or being a follower, or a student, an apprentice of Jesus, is all about relationship. It has nothing to do with religion. It has nothing to do with traditions. It has nothing to do with most of the things that we make it about. It is all about relationship. So the beginning of this, factually, is just about the who. He sets the groundwork. The Father, the Son, and his disciples. We are in this coexisting community, if you will, and it's an exclusive group, not unlike this exclusive community that we are in front of right now. Now that he's covered the who, he's going to move on to the what in verse 10. "If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love." That's the what. That's what this relationship is about. We love one another, the Father, the Son, those of us who have chosen to give our lives to him, to live for him. We are in this community, and the what is we love each other. We love each other, and this is old news. Unless you've missed several lessons, we had 2 or 3 lessons on what defines love in this triangle relationship, and what defines it is keeping the commands of the Father, obeying the Father. So if you have questions about that, I just recommend you go back into those lessons where we talked at length, where Jesus spoke often about this. That's the what. The who, you got the who, that's the what. Now this is the part that as I read through it again, I found simply incredible. Let's look at verse 11. So in verse 11, we move on to the why. Here it is. "I have told you this." Why? "So that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be complete." There it is. I found that so surprising when I slowed down and look at it. Doesn't it surprise you? Don't you find that incredible that Jesus says, my joy now gets transferred to you, and it becomes complete in you. It's not just joy once in a while, whenever you can put on a happy face when things are going well. Joy is something we're going to delve into, because Jesus says, incredibly, you now enter into an exclusive group of people who get to share my joy. I pass my joy to you, and now it completes joy. It's not a partial joy. It's completely filled in you. So I find this incredible, not just incredible that we have a relationship with the Father and the Son. By now, that's really not new news, although it is incredible. And not just that we have as the core of our relationship with the Father and the Son obedience to their commands, their desires for our life, but incredible that joy is what gets passed on to us. His joy. Now, we started today by asking the question, describe God in one word. Follow-up question. This isn't a discussion question. I just want you to think about it. Did anyone in your group, did anyone describe God as joy? And for some reason, that is the last thing that comes to mind. And it shouldn't be. It should be one of the first things that comes to mind when it comes to God is joy. But we never ever think about that. You know, it's easy to think about his vastness and his grace and his love and his kindness and forgiveness and all those things. But for some reason, joy never seems to figure in, even though Jesus says, here's the great group you're part of now. It's a group of people that I give my joy to. That means at the essence, one of the very basic natures of God is joy. How important is it? C.S. Lewis once wrote this: "Joy is the serious business of heaven." I love what he said there. I mean, you want to get serious about God, you need to understand that joy is what the kingdom of God is about. Is that what you are known for? Is that what I am known for? Is joy. Now, what is joy? Most basically, joy is a perspective on life. It's not happiness. Happiness comes and goes based on the circumstances. Joy is a perspective. And I want to call joy something you've probably never associated with joy. I want to call it tough. I want to call joy tough, or true grit. True Grit's a big deal in our neck of the woods in Montrose. True Grit was filmed just up the road, 25 miles. True grit is what joy is. True grit comes to mind when I read James, the very first chapter of Jesus' brother's letter. James chapter 1 verse 2 begins this way: "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds." What are trials if not things that make us tough, and they're tough to deal with? And he says, here's how you deal with those trials, the toughness of the trials: joy. Joy is the antidote to the tough, difficult things in life, I think is what he says. And he goes on, "Because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking in anything." I love that phrase, mature and complete. What was it his brother Jesus said? Your joy may be complete. There is a completeness that comes when we take the joy of Christ into our lives, and it's essential to who we are now in this exclusive club, the joy bearers of Jesus. Not everybody in the world, in fact, very few people in the world can say they get to be a part of that. Okay, we're going to do something a little different now. I'm going to give you 3 discussion questions in a row. So, you're going to have to keep pausing that video, and this may take a while. Number 1, discussion question: what does joy look like? Could you describe, as a group, begin to unpack what joy actually looks like when you see it? Number 2, why is joy so important? I mean, if it's important enough for Jesus to say, if you've connected with me, if you shared in the love that I have with the Father has with me, if you're in that community, then you get joy. Why is it so important to God? And why should it be so important to us? And the third question is, what is your joy quotient? You know what I mean by that? Let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being complete, perfect, mature joy that Jesus described. Does that describe you? Is that how others would describe you? That would be a 10. If joy just eludes you all the time, you never can find it, that'd probably be a 1. What's your quotient, your joy quotient? Talk about that for a moment, if you would. I hope you had a great discussion. Let's turn to Chuck Swindoll once again to get some insight into joy. He says, joy is a choice. It is a matter of attitude that stems from one's confidence in God, that He is at work, that He is in full control, that He is in the midst of whatever has happened, is happening, and will happen. I mentioned before a great series of books by Andy Andrews called The Noticer Returns, and Just Jones. That middle book, The Noticer Returns, has a scene in it that I find so intriguing, so helpful when it comes to this discussion. Let me set it up for you. Jones is a character, he's an older man, but he's a type of Jesus. Now, when I say he's a type of Jesus, what do I mean? Jesus said that the Son of Man will be like Jonah, who spent 3 days in the belly of the fish. That means Jonah was a type of Jesus. He resembled Jesus in that he spent 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a fish. There's other places in Scripture where we see types of Jesus. You might say that Isaac was a type of Jesus. Remember, he was going to be sacrificed by his father. All those come into play, but Jones is a type of Jesus. As you read through these books or listen to him, you'll see that he has the attributes of Jesus as he relates to people. In this scene, he's actually interacting with Andy Andrews, who is a part of the book at this point. And Andy says that he was downcast, he was bummed, he was just disappointed about his life. and he's walking along with Jones alongside a swimming pool, and they're just having this discussion, and this old man Jones just pushes Andrews into the pool. It was a cold Alabama night, I guess, and Andy Andrews falls into the pool, and he looks up through the water, and he can see Jones just kind of laughing at him. He comes up, and he is angry. He is ticked. Why'd you do that? I want to quote now Jones once he helps him out of the pool. Here's exactly what Jones says. Every single day of the rest of your life, someone or something will push you in the pool, and you'd better decide now how you're going to act when it happens. Isn't that true? Every day, something happens, someone interacts with us, and it's like being pushed in a pool. It's like surprised to be all of a sudden out of control of things in life. And he says, decide now that you will react in a way that is joyful. He says your options are you can come up fighting and screaming and yelling, or you can come up acting the victim. Why me? Why'd you do this to me? Or he said there's a third option, and the third option is that you can come up laughing about it, smiling about it, saying, okay, what do I need to learn from that? It's a picture of an attitude that's chosen beforehand, and I believe that attitude is joy. Now I want to talk quickly about a couple things that suppresses joy in our life, okay? Things that kind of put a damper on the joy that Jesus gives us. And the first one is simply that we see the circumstances of life as bigger than Jesus in that moment. In Numbers chapter 13, Joshua and Caleb are sent with 10 other men to spy on Canaan, and they return, and you might remember that they had different reports. The 10 said, oh, there's giants in the land. We can't go. They'll kill us. They'll smash us. But Joshua and Caleb respond differently. And I want to read to you from Numbers chapter 14, starting in verse 6. Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, who were among those who led the exploration in the land, tore their clothes and said to the entire Israelite assembly, the land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will swallow them up. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. Because of their perspective, they saw something that the other 10 spies did not. I want to call it seeing the unseen, right? All the other spies could see were giants that were going to smash them. Caleb and Joshua saw something different. They saw God at work, and nothing can stand in the way of God. Well, they should believe that because they've just come through the Red Sea, right? A God that can part the Red Sea and you can walk on dry land, can he not deal with some really tall dudes, tall, ugly guys? Of course he can. And so that's their perspective. They chose beforehand, I believe, to have that perspective. And I think it's a perspective of joy. It's, hey, this is good. It's as good. I don't care what the circumstances are. This will work because God is on our side. It's not unlike what Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, starting in verse 16. He says, therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. We talked about that verse before. It is so true, right? Our bodies waste away, but inside we're being renewed. And he goes on to say how it works. For our light momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. See, that's what I'm talking about. Seeing the unseen. I think that's joy. I think that's God is in control no matter what the circumstances are. So I have a real peace and contentment about that. I love what Max Lucado says about that. It is in storms that Jesus does his finest work. For it is in storms that he has our keenest attention. We aren't to be oblivious to the overwhelming challenges that life brings. We're to counterbalance them with long looks at God's accomplishments. Do whatever it takes to keep your gaze on Jesus. The storms that they went through on the Sea of Galilee, once they focused on what Jesus was doing, everything was okay, right? Paul again writes in the letter to the Philippians, he's writing from jail, from prison, and the average person, myself included, probably would be downcast and bummed, and how could this happen to me? Listen to what he writes in chapter 1 of Philippians, verse 12. And I want you to know, my dear brothers and sisters, that everything that has happened to me has helped to spread the good news. For everyone here, including the whole palace guard, knows that I am in chains because of Christ. And because of my imprisonment, most of the believers here have gained confidence and boldly speak God's message without fear. No matter the circumstances. See, I tend to lose joy when I look at circumstances. The circumstances of this life, of this culture, of my personal life, maybe your health. And when we focus on that, we lose our joy. Paul says, you know what, if it wasn't for these circumstances that look pretty tough, there wouldn't be these great things happening. So the first thing that tends to suppress the joy in our life is simply the focus on circumstances instead of Christ. The second thing is simply this, taking ourselves too seriously. Have you ever known anybody that just doesn't take themselves that seriously? It's not like they hate themselves or down and depressed all the time, but when funny things or odd things happen to them, they don't get all embarrassed, they don't get all upset because they don't take themselves so seriously. That shows not just a focus on circumstances, that shows a focus on ourselves. Again, I take you to Philippians, the joy letter from Paul in chapter 4, verse 4. Always be full of joy in the Lord. I say it again, rejoice. Let everyone see that you are considerate in all that you do. See, how can I be considerate to others if my focus is on myself? And there's no way I can be full of joy, complete in my joy, as Jesus promised me to be a part of this exclusive group of people who have His joy. I can't do that when I focus on myself. Years ago, a man by the name of G.W. Target wrote a short story, and I'm not going to read that story to you. I'm just going to tell you kind of my version of that story. It's about two men who are in a hospital, and they're sharing the same room, and they're both very ill. In fact, both of them are to stay on their backs the whole time, except for the one patient who is next to a window, the only window in the room. And for an hour a day, he can get up on one elbow and look out the window, and because it helped drain fluid from his lungs. So as they laid there and they got to know each other really well, they talked about their kids and their grandkids and their friends and their employment and their time in the military, vacations they had taken. They got to know each other in a great way. And the man who was not close to the window just so looked forward to that hour a day when his roommate would get up and look out the window and tell him what he saw. And when he described to him what he was seeing, he said, I see a beautiful park out here. He said, there's a beautiful pond, and there's geese and ducks swimming on it, and there's lovers walking around hand in hand, there's children playing, and they're flying kites. So this guy's roommate would go into great detail about what he was seeing and how beautiful it was and how the sun glimmered off the lake, and he'd even talk about the skyline, how he could see the skyline of the city and describe that to him. And the roommate enjoyed that like nothing else. He looked forward to it every day. And then one day, a thought occurred to him that kind of bothered him. And the thought was, why does he get to be by the window? He dismissed it, but it kept coming back to his mind. And after a while, he actually became bitter. He became really frustrated that he didn't get to be by the window. One night, his roommate began to choke. He began to cough. And the roommate could not even reach his button to call a nurse. And yet this man next to him chose not to call the nurse with his button. The choking and the coughing went on for 5 minutes, and then it was silent. The man knew that his roommate had died. The next morning, the nurse came in to give them their baths, and she saw that the one man had passed away. And they, without saying a word, people came in and took that man and led him away. And when enough time had passed, that man's roommate said to the nurse, is it possible that I could be moved over by the window? And she said, well, sure. And she made that happen. She rolled him over there, and when she had left, he struggled and got the energy up and the motivation to get up on one elbow and look out and to get his own look out that window. And as he glanced out that window, he saw a brick wall. That's all there was a brick wall. Joy is a choice. Joy is the natural reflection of what happens when we're in a loving relationship with the Father and the Son. It is a perspective on life that we decide before any circumstances in our life that we will take on to honor Him, to honor them. Thanks for joining us here in the twilight hours of Tucson, Arizona. Have a wonderful day.